Insights channel. Steve here, and today I'm going to talk to you about a very serious point that a lot of people don't know about, or they avoid it, and it is from chapter 54 from one of my latest books, Out of the Bottomless Pit 2, and it's called Oxygen is Disappearing from the Planet. Is it true that we used to have a lot more oxygen in our atmosphere in the past, and the lack of oxygen could possibly be the cause of many modern sicknesses, or at the very least exacerbating the conditions? Well, I certainly found plenty of shocking evidence that the oxygen levels on our planet are decreasing at an alarming and dangerous rate. Whilst foolish global warmists worry about insignificant CO2 gas, it only occupies 0.02% of our atmospheric gases compared to 19% oxygen, which you'll see is dangerously low. See for yourselves in the following comprehensive article on the topic by expert Dr. May Wan-ho. Oxygen is dropping faster than CO2, rising implications for climate change politics. New research shows oxygen depletion in the atmosphere accelerating since 2003, coinciding with the biofuels boom. Climate politics that focus exclusively on carbon sequestration could be disastrous for all oxygen-breathing organisms, including humans, and that's Dr. May Wan-ho. Threat of oxygen depletion. Mention climate change and everyone thinks of CO2 increasing in the atmosphere. The greenhouse effect heating the earth, glaciers melting, rising sea levels, floods, hurricanes, droughts, and a host of other environmental catastrophes. Climate mitigating policies almost all aimed at reducing CO2 by whatever means. Within the past several years, however, scientists have found that oxygen, O2, in the atmosphere has been dropping, and at higher rates than just the amount that goes into the increase of CO2 from burning of fossil fuels, some 2 to 4 times as much, and accelerating since 2002 to 3. Simultaneously, oxygen levels in the world's oceans have also been falling. See warming ocean starved of oxygen. It's becoming clear that getting rid of CO2 is not enough. Oxygen has its own dynamic, rapid decline in atmospheric oxygen must also be addressed. Although there is much more oxygen than CO2 in the atmosphere, 21% or 209,460 ppm of oxygen compared with around 380. God, yeah, look at that number. 210,000 versus 380. There's no comparison. Humans, all mammals, birds, frogs, butterflies, bees, and other air-breathing life forms depend on this high level of oxygen for their well-being, living with oxygen. In humans, failure of oxygen energy metabolism is the single most important risk factor for chronic diseases, including cancer and death. Oxygen deficiency is currently set at 19.5% in enclosed spaces for health and safety. Below that, fainting and death may result. The simultaneous decrease in ocean oxygen not only threatens the survival of aerobic marine organisms, but is symptomatic of the slowdown in the ocean's thermocline conveyor belt circulation system that transports heat from the tropics to the poles. This itself could trigger an ice age. Overturns layers of into the deep and vice versa. We'll have to read that again, I've forgotten it. The simultaneous decrease in ocean oxygen not only threatens the survival of aerobic marine organisms, but is symptomatic of the slowdown in the ocean's thermocline conveyor belt circulation system that transports heat from the tropics to the poles. And this itself could trigger an ice age. Yeah, as you saw in the famous movie The Day After Tomorrow back in 2003. Alright. This dynamic system is highly non-linear. Talk about the circulation of the oceans and warm and cold waters. Small changes could make it fail altogether, with disastrous runaway effects on the climate, global warming and the big freeze. More importantly, it could wipe out the ocean's phytoplankton, resultantly responsible for splitting water to regenerate oxygen from the entire biosphere, on land and in the sea. Global CO2 records go back more than 50 years, but oxygen measurement in combination with CO2 goes back barely 2 decades. It's already giving important information on the size of the carbon sink in the ocean relative to the land. For one thing, oxygen and carbon have very different solubility in seawater. While 99% of the oxygen remains in the atmosphere, 98% of the CO2 is in seawater. Decrease in atmospheric oxygen has been detected in stations around the world for the past decade, a consistent downward trend that has accelerated in recent years. The largest fall in oxygen was observed in the study of a Swiss research team led by Francesco Valentino at University of Bern for data collected at high-altitude research stations in Switzerland and France. The researchers speculated the large decrease in atmospheric oxygen since 2003 could have been a result of oxygen being taken up by the ocean, either due to a cooling of water in the North Atlantic or water moving northwards from the tropic cooling, both of which could increase the water's ability to take up more oxygen. However, it would require unrealistic cooling to account for the change in CO2 concentration, and all the indications are that the ocean waters have warmed since records began. O2, or oxygen, is decreasing faster than can be accounted for by the rise in CO2. Furthermore, the decrease is not uniform throughout the entire period. Instead, it's much steeper between 2002 and 2005 at both stations, and is not accompanied by any change in the trend of CO2 increase. This sharp acceleration in the downward trend of atmospheric oxygen from 2002 to 3 onwards in Ireland and the Netherlands is in accord with the findings in Switzerland and France. This cannot be explained by a realistic increase in fossil fuel use or oxygen uptake by cooler ocean waters. If anything, oxygen level in the oceans has also been falling. So where and what is the oxygen sink that is soaking up the oxygen? Thus, the expansion of agriculture and grazing through the 20th century has probably caused a decrease in the oxidative ratio of the plant biomass within these disturbed ecosystems. Using several simple models, the researchers showed that indeed small changes would lead to substantial decreases in atmospheric oxygen. Another research team has raised the possibility that reactive nitrogen produced in making artificial fertilizers for agriculture could also be tying up more oxygen in plant tissue, soil organic matter, and oceans in the form of nitrates. This includes widespread deforestation and replacement of woody vegetation with pastures and crops in the tropics, an increase in fire activity, tree mortality, an increase in the abundance of deciduous tree species and herbaceous plants in the boreal northern regions. Globally, this includes an increase in invasive species and increased disturbance of agricultural soils by ploughing and grazing through the 20th century. Change in land use and increased oxidation of nitrogen could explain the long-term steady decline in atmospheric oxygen. It may well also account for the sharp acceleration of the downward trend since 2002 to 2003. Alright, there's more there from research and the scientists, a lot there. But I want to point out that I've done research on this before. I took my wife for 3 years to oxygen centre. She needed extra oxygen, hyperbaric oxygen chambers. Did that for 3 years. And we studied what the doctors there said, some of the world's experts. And they said that there's a serious crisis with oxygen, because the levels of oxygen in the world used to be much higher. Today they're sitting at average around about 21%. It's about what it is in Scotland. But in the big cities it's down to about 19%. And as we read earlier here, the numbers, if it goes below than 19 something, you have got a lot of respiratory problems, lung problems, etc. And that could explain the deterioration in people's health over the last 20 years. There's not enough oxygen anymore, especially in the big cities. So I think that's something to keep your eyes on. Oxygen amount in the atmosphere is far more important than CO2 levels, which are a ridiculous 1,000 times smaller in amount there is in the atmosphere than oxygen. But the amount of oxygen going down is far higher than the amount of CO2. And that's according to scientists, experts. Okay? Very, very interesting information. I'll just here related, it says here, according to the data Keeling has meticulously collected since 1989, the world is running out of breathable air, and the rate that it's losing oxygen is now on the verge of accelerating. Scientists have painted a scenario that could account for mass extinctions from terrestrial oxygen depletion that would certainly lay the foundation for a rapid acceleration of oxygen depletion and the resulting mass death to follow. Mass death on a planetary scale. And that you can see on survivalacres.com blog. Oxygen levels are dropping. So I think that we ought to be keeping our eyes much more. What are the levels of oxygen like where you live? Much more than listening to silly global warming nonsense about CO2 depletion, which is only 0.02% in the atmosphere. It's nothing. CO2 has absolutely nothing to do with global warming, and global warming is just a lie that the globalists make money on. It's just absolute balderdash. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for listening. I hope you found that interesting what the scientists say about the real situation with gases like oxygen and CO2. And I hope you will get hold of my books like this one, Out the Bottomless Pit, number 2 and number 1, and my other 8 books so far, Insights books. I'm coming out with a new one within the next month. The new book's going to be called Secrets of Enoch Insights. It's based on the second book of Enoch. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.